We've met before, haven't we?
We are back here again. Okay, well, we've just had the Silent Hill transmission event, and there seems to be a number of people that are convinced that the game now looks better than the last time we saw it. Fortunately, amongst many of you, I feel like I have found my people, and we can all console each other here. I think that what has actually happened here is that the previous trailer focused mostly on combat, which is not a series strength, whereas the extended transmission footage that we've now seen showed off the slower, more thoughtful pacing of James walking around the town, which is the majority of the experience that we remember from the original, so it's more familiar. I think that is what has convinced people that there's been some sort of turnaround. Personally, I think that the quality of the game looks exactly the same. It feels less Silent Hill 2 and more Silent Hill Downpour 2. And seeing James take a break from being too good at the combat that he's not good at to engage with modern, idiot-proof exploration hasn't really moved the needle for me. Still, whilst I will point out some of the smaller individual details that made me shake my head later on in this video, there are two large areas of concern for me which form the main basis of my reaction to this footage. The first problem, which isn't anything we haven't seen already, is that the Lynchian identity of the dialogue that presents the storyline is completely absent. Silent Hill 2's personality cannot be found here. You can represent the premise, the characters, the locations, the monsters, but if you don't have the same identity, if you aren't telling us this story with the same eye twitch, you are far from achieving the same result, and what you end up with is just simply worse. The second problem is the way in which they have presented Maria, and I have three separate concerns. Firstly, after the silhouette tease of the original trailer, which seemed to suggest that Bloober Team at least knew that they needed to approach introducing Maria with some gravity, here they've not really introduced her at all. We see her on the bed in the hospital in silence, and then we quickly move on to her simply running around with James. I would have rather had one single but profound line of dialogue from Maria as she lies on the bed, and then we don't see her again in the trailer. None of the rest of the scenes where we do actually see her in this footage are positive additions, and in fact they only subtract, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. The second concern that I have is that they've broken a rule of the original game in that Maria is now appearing in scenes with other character NPCs, whereas originally, for example, she'd talk to James about whether he'd managed to chase Laura down, but you never actually saw Maria in the same room as her. Maria would be with James in isolation every time that we ever saw her. Gee, I wonder why that was. And lastly, I am disturbed by how normal Maria is, and not in a good way, much like with all of the other characters. Originally, Maria had this kind of resting die face, and her eyes were just plain insane. Her atmosphere was completely otherworldly. You should be able to kind of feel Silent Hill emanating from this woman, and it's just not here. She comes across like a friendly NPC that's part of your JRPG party. She's just here to be along for the ride, and everything seems really normal. Much like with any of the other dialogue that we've seen so far, these are modern acting sensibilities presented by a Western developer that didn't have anything to do with the original game, and just seem to be completely ignoring the whole David Lynch influence on this series, particularly this entry. Now, I could write a lengthy and meticulous list of everything that is really wrong with this footage, but the starting point sums up everything. The first problem that is obvious to me in this new footage is also the main problem I have with how this game has been handled, and listening to this dialogue, it's obvious that Bloober Team have failed to recreate all of the weirdness of Silent Hill 2.
Sorry, I was just...
It's okay, I didn't mean to scare you.
All of that Lynchian atmosphere is just gone. When you revisit the voice acting of the original game, it sits neatly alongside Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, Mulholland Drive, or any other David Lynch project. Silent Hill 2 wore said influence on its sleeve, and this remake has none of that oddity.
Man's attitude goes some ways, the way his life will be. Is that something you might agree with?
Sure.
Now, did you answer because that's what you thought I wanted to hear? Or did you think about what I said and answer because you truly believe that to be right?
I agree with what you said. Truly.
What'd I say?
The acting here is more like a serious modern drama. The performances could fit into The Walking Dead or The Last of Us, but certainly wouldn't slide up alongside Lost Highway, which, of all of Lynch's films, is undoubtedly one of the main influences on Silent Hill 2.
We've met before, haven't we?
I don't think so. Where was it you think we met?
At your house, don't you remember?
No, I don't. Are you sure?
Of course. As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
What do you mean you're where right now?
At your house.
That's fucking crazy, man.
Call me.
My previous videos have gone into great detail to fastidiously critique every minor pickup that I could see, and yet here I find myself instantly feeling like the project is pretty much just dead. There's no life in this body. Looking at it now, it's not even the same corpse. I'm just disassociative from it. This game just feels so normal. These people feel normal, and that's yet another red flag. I wouldn't say that the voice acting is bad, per se, but rather I'd say that it's just entirely wrong for this project, and there's a distinct difference there. If these performers were in any other video game, I wouldn't give a shit. I can see the trap that many people seem to have fallen into with this new footage, now that it looks like a more realised video game and we've seen more of it, with environments sporting decent graphics and lighting, albeit the combat toting some fairly janky animations. People seem to be content with how this has turned out. It looks like one of the video games. Unfortunately, I think that the essence of the property is thoroughly dead-eyed in this. Without the unique weirdness of the original game, without everything just feeling kind of off-kilter, this has become just a basic third-person horror shooter in cosplay. We get more on-the-nose environmental assets and dialogue. This electroconvulsive therapy bed, not present in the original game, propped up with even the surrounding room angled towards it, with all of the subtlety of a dog shitting on the carpet, is god-awful. I'm not even sure what they're going for with this. Given that this trailer deals a lot with Angela and the abstract daddy, this may be for Angela rather than James. Perhaps they've added a detail to Angela's backstory where she was, for whatever reason, treated with electroconvulsive therapy due to perceived manic behaviour that she started exhibiting after years of sexual abuse. Either way, propping the bed up like this with the same nuance with which you presented the bloody handkerchief originally, or had the words "reap what you sow" on the walls, is yet more damning evidence of an endemic problem that reaches beyond Silent Hill 2 Remake, where the developers of games these days do not trust us to reach our own conclusions or to explore for ourselves. We are not trusted to get it anymore. In the Resident Evil script that I'm writing at the moment, one of the criticisms I aim at Remake is the fact that it is the Resident Evil game that started to introduce the idiot map that told us as players whether we'd finished exploring a room yet or not before we'd even actually looked. I noticed that this game has started to exhibit the exact same problems, but on an even more contemporary level with even more modern, dumbed down ways of doing it. Why aren't we allowed to explore anymore? These are survival horror games. One of the principal mechanics of survival horror is being lost. Well, you certainly won't be lost anymore in this fucking game. Think about it. This is a game set in a completely dead void of a town that blankets itself with fog to obscure your way, that wants you to get lost in it. The storyline wants James to come here and disappear into the fog, and you are writing the area of the town we're now in on the fucking screen without us checking the map or asking. This is why this genre is in severe trouble in the AAA space. You, the player, are treated like a fucking idiot. You guys wouldn't get it, so we're going to prop this really obvious symbolic gesture up for you to be unable to avoid. We wouldn't want you to get lost in the game that's all about getting lost. I'm going to be objective and say that in a vacuum, if this wasn't a remake of Silent Hill 2, if this was just a generic horror game and I saw this combat with the nurses, I'd absolutely be down to play this. If there were no stakes involved, I wouldn't care. The animations and grab sequences are very janky, but that hasn't stopped me before from playing games that have worse animations than this. Unfortunately, my impressions sour pretty quickly again when we see James, the everyman, perform an almost Modern Warfare level speedy coup de grace on this nurse here. As I've stated before, if you're someone who doesn't really care too much for the finer details of the story and are more of a casual looking to just bash some monsters in a horror game over Halloween, I get why you're looking at this and thinking that it's good. It's just that as a fan of the original Silent Hill 2, I cannot. I know what the flaws look like beneath decent modern graphics and passable combat. I think this is very much an if you know kind of situation, and I'm not mad at people with a pedestrian interest in Silent Hill or horror in general thinking that this looks okay. Because it does, if your interest in the game is on a basic level. Then we get an abysmal redirection of the scene with Angela right before the abstract daddy fight in the labyrinth. In the original game, Angela is essentially about to be downright sexually assaulted, and here she's having a conversation with, I'm guessing, her brother, and the abstract daddy attacks James. Of course, this is edited and we're not seeing the scene play out as it does in-game, but when James opens that door, this sounds awful to request, but it should be to a presumed sexual assault that's about to occur, and instead we're getting some sort of preamble conversation. Perhaps Bloober Team have noped out at the thought of going there after the criticism of the medium's molestation storyline. Perhaps they have toned it down for modern sensibilities, in which case they were the wrong choice of developer for more than one reason. People have expressed concern about this room, and I generally agree. I think that this is in fact the abstract daddy boss fight room, as we can see similar piston action mechanisms in the dark corners of the room here just kind of pumping away, and it's probably what this hole is on the wall here as well. Still, I agree that this room looks considerably larger than the boss fight room in the original, which was a confined, tight space with no real room to avoid the abstract daddy because it's supposed to be representative of sexual molestation. Then we move on to the Silent Hill transmission that followed immediately after the Sony event, and we got an extended look at the game. It starts with the proclamation that this is a faithful remake. I'm afraid you don't really get to be the judge of that one, Bloober Team. I tried to find this quote on the wall using the scanned words briefly on display here, but I couldn't identify it. Still, it seems better than reap what you sow. There's James's internal GPS for all of you idiots out there. James seemingly has Barry Burton's blood splatter analysing skills.
What is this? Hey, wait.
I don't think you'd be saying, hey wait, to whatever that was. They've screwed up the first enemy reveal. In the original game, the enemy wanders into the fog at such a distance that we aren't sure it's actually an enemy. That's kind of the point. Conversely, you know for a fine fact that whatever that was isn't someone that you can just go up and talk to. It's not something to follow. Oh yeah, I'll just run after that guy that just scraped his own face along the asphalt and ask if he knows how to get to the hotel from here. Jesus Christ. I still think that the fog looks more like smoke. They've reused tracks from the original game's score, except if this footage is anything to go by, they've done it in a hodgepodge kind of way and have just reused them anyway, instead of trying to keep original areas feeling the same. There are multiple uses of the original game's music in this footage that aren't in the locations that they were originally, which is disappointing because Yamaoka seems to be treating the original score kind of like an a la carte resource instead of figuring that the original players have made ties between locations and pieces of music. This clickable crawl space is the start of the deluge of modern-day UI elements where the atmosphere of the game is ruined by on-screen prompts instead of just trusting us to find out what we're looking for. I mean, they didn't trust us to find the gaping hole with the blood trails, for fuck's sake. They didn't trust us to just try and press X on that hole and see if we could enter it, or get some kind of commentary about it at the very least. Explore and investigate, you know, like you used to do in survival horror games. I'm pretty sure that the game is also riddled with that other nasty modern plague of framing the camera to a point of interest by basically taking control of it out of your hands and forcibly moving the camera towards whatever the game needs you to look at. The masterpiece of psychological horror, everybody. We see the exact same hand-holding with the radio scene right after. Addressing the elephant in the room, obviously they've changed this scene from how it was originally. I think this is a misstep. Whilst I'm not mad about the change of location in a literal sense, where originally it takes place in a little tunnel undergoing some sort of construction work, the issue I take with this scene is that it's now not off the beaten track. My guess is that they have streamlined picking up the radio so that this room, it's practically on your route into town as it is, whereas originally you see the lying figure monster, not knowing it's a monster though having a reasonably educated guess, disappearing into the fog, where the blood trails lead you down the path to where the tunnel is off the beaten track. You're brought here for this purpose of finding the radio. Whether Mary can be intermittently heard on the radio right after this new scene remains to be seen. It may be forgotten about. An even bigger issue with this scene is that the lying figure now seem to have obvious seams. So, for anyone that doesn't know, originally the lying figure, designed by Ito, who has returned for this project, they were inspired by Ito watching a colleague walk down through the office wearing a hoodie with his hands in his pockets. Ito took inspiration from the form of this and came up with an enemy design that is kind of representative of someone in a straitjacket. Really, what it ended up representing within the final game proper is a subtle messaging regarding the hospital bed confinement and sense of restriction and binding that James's terminally ill wife Mary must have gone through. Still, whilst obviously a technical limitation of the time, the original designs didn't have blatant lace seams or zippers or whatever. The subtle feeling was implied strictly through the form of the enemy, much like Ito saw it in the simple silhouette of his colleague that day. To see the way that the game is being dumbed down across the board is kind of disheartening. We get more combat, which again looks passable, but not exactly riveting. The dodge mechanic is fucking ridiculous though. I don't mind James being able to be somewhat kind of nimble on his feet, but it should be in an incredibly nervy, jerky kind of way, not a sudden duck like he's practiced. James isn't used to this shit, and yet here he is pulling head movement dodges out like he's been going to a boxing gym in the first encounter of the game. Remember when Alex from Silent Hill Homecoming was revealed as that game's new protagonist, and that he could do dodge moves and rolls and was generally meant to be quite good at melee combat because he was a former Marine or whatever the hell he was? Well, everyone at the time complained that such a character would be the focus of a Silent Hill game because we were used to more pathetic main characters, people who weren't physical fighters. Well, at least Alex had a lore excuse to be somewhat decent in a fight. What is James's reason here? Exactly, he doesn't have one. Whilst I think that they did do a good job with the camera and the feedback when James takes impact himself from a nurse later on in this trailer, I think that the melee combat is missing the ridiculous heft of the original game, and many people will be missing it. It wasn't necessarily realistic, particularly from an audio standpoint, but it didn't need to be. The job of the game's feedback was to feel satisfying and to convey information. That has been lost on this remake because these swings have been softened considerably, and the combat feels less impactful. Given that we'll also see later on that James has less ammunition than you would generally expect in Silent Hill 2, and that melee combat is probably going to be much more of a focus, I think that if the melee combat doesn't have the impact that it did originally, this might be a bit of a dud. Then we get a click on the enemy prompt to start a cutscene. Fuck me. Just do what the original game did and start the scene as soon as we kill the enemy if you honestly don't trust us to investigate it ourselves. You'll notice now a series of awful UI elements. The red framing around the camera border that is supposed to indicate grave injury and the need to heal isn't the worst thing this game's about to show, even if it is unoriginal. What makes me laugh though is that it's so perfectly square to the screen instead of trying to be a bit more organic. Still, I would have preferred to just rely on James's stance and his walking animation to tell how injured I was. Developers these days do know that that's how games used to communicate that information, right? Developers are probably as old as I am, on average, nowadays. They played the exact same shit, surely. Back in the day, horror games had inventory screens that you'd have to essentially pause the game to go into and take care of whatever business you did, whether that was healing or examining items. So games had to rely on an on-screen indicator of your health, something that wasn't some intrusive heads-up display element that killed the immersion. There's no health bar or anything like that. There's just a change in stance if you become injured. I don't get why I can't just use James's stance to understand what's going on with him. Then we get 2 pieces of the original soundtrack playing at the same time. The track known as Combing Down West has been playing the whole time, and then the sinister metallic music from the apartment stairwell plays again over the top, almost as if it's somehow related to the prompt to smash the window and grab the health drink, which is fucking bizarre. I don't know whether the score for this has just been cobbled together in any old fashion at this point for the sake of having something behind this footage, but smashing this car window to get a healing item shouldn't be the intense moment that this dueling fucking soundtrack is now making it out to be. Then we get the cursed heads-up display making its presence felt, making this game feel like one of the video games when the original didn't have this problem. There would be an item on screen somewhere, and the game would either frame it, the camera, or James's head so that you could notice it. No extra diegetic prompt buttons floating in the air. We didn't need them. Going back to the remake, the heads-up display then tells us that we've used our Calpol and that we don't have any syringes either. The old ampoules, which by this point in the game we wouldn't even know that they were a thing, so why are you telegraphing them? Also, I have to commend you on a great job in further treating us like morons by changing them from the original ampoules to syringes, because God forbid you actually contribute to expanding somebody's vocabulary. I learned the word ampoule from Silent Hill 2.
Where are you, Mary?
Maybe it's just me, but I presume that Mary wouldn't be anywhere near these sheds at the ass end of town when I've just got here, and she had said to meet at the hotel. So this is a really weird point to kind of ask this question aloud. I'm not going to lie, I actually think that this corpse looks pretty good. Unlike the extra diegetic prompt, you feel that we needed to investigate the fucking melted man on the floor. On a personal note, this is probably worse than grabbing the wallet from the toilet in the original. If James wants to borrow the matches from the man who exploded from Ebola, that's on him. Then we get the hint to head to Neely's bar, which is good, because it's just a simple box of matches. The hint is there, it's in plain writing. You don't need to have the character say something stupid, it's obvious. Then we get James literally drawing onto the map because Bloober couldn't stand the fact that something that we have all accepted for years as part of Silent Hill games, which is that the protagonist updates the map as we discover things, wasn't literally done on screen in front of us in any of those games. For all of the animation work this game needs, they wasted time adding this in. We all know that the protagonist is updating the map with a red pen, Bloober. This is something that didn't need to be shown on PlayStation 1 in the fucking 90s. You can kind of infer from the fact that Harry or James or Heather or whoever has updated the map with a red pen when the writing just magically appears on the map the next time that we look at it. Jesus fucking Christ. And 2 steps away is another floating X button. Then we get this note. Now, I don't know whether this note is supposed to be like some of the original texts in the game where they were partly illegible due to wear or erasure, and so only some of the words were displayed when the character tried to read it. But we're looking at this paper and there's nothing here to indicate wear or erasure, so it's just bad localization instead. Great. I take it that this scene is just edited. Several lines are missing. If this is the new full scene, then James comes across like a fucking madman just approaching little girls asking what they have on them. Original James actually tries to ask Laura how she knows Mary.
What's that letter?
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
Wait! How do you know Mary's name?
He doesn't stop and ponder it whilst the answer is running away.
What? Hey, wait! How do you know her name?
Oh god, they wouldn't do this. This is shite, I'm sorry, but like, this where they stop and just like look at each other. This is absolutely rote as fuck. It's weird. This is amateur hour right here. Like, why have you made them do this? They just, they run to the bottom of the stairs, stop, look at each other and go, wow, she went in there. Like, what the fuck is this? More janky animations. Oh, hey, dipshit, you're in that Brookhaven hospital that you've just entered. I just thought we'd give you a heads up. I mentioned in my first video that wind and Silent Hill generally don't go together, and this is exactly why. I hate that Maria is staring at this picture. I fucking hate it. Oh, obviously it's a foreshadowing of the enemies in the hospital, and Maria is telegraphing it. More telegraphing of information. Like, what the fuck? Why? Just let the player discover this themselves. Maria shouldn't be anywhere near it. She should be off in the corner just doing something that, like, you know, isn't important, just fucking staring into space. This should be a creepy, unsettling picture that the player can either find themselves or that they miss it and it was in plain sight all along, which is kind of creepy in of itself. But no, have Maria fucking pointed out by fucking standing there fucking staring at it. Christ almighty, man. I mentioned in my first video that Maria signposts the hotel across the lake in the original game, but that is like general foreshadowing of the storyline and not something that you're about to bump into. It's not like, oh, by the way, you're about to be dealing with these fucking nurses real soon. Like, because obviously the whole point of this picture is that, like, these are the enemies that you're about to be dealing with in the hospital. Having Maria stare at this is more like when you enter a room in a game and it's like stacked with supplies and you're like, well, I'm fighting a boss in the next fucking room. Terrible. Like, what the fuck? Again, Maria shouldn't be here if James is with Laura. Maria does not appear when other characters are there. There's kind of a fucking reason for that, man. Fuck's sake. James lets the nurse walk past, and he just fucking runs past it anyway. And the nurse doesn't react and follow him. The nurses react to sound and disturbances. I don't understand why the fucking hell this nurse does not know that James is there, because he's not that far away. And then he runs into the next hallway and just starts popping off with his gun, and the nurse doesn't follow behind him through the doors. Because the doors aren't exactly locked, they're just like swing doors that are like open. Again, being objective, I think that the impact from the nurse's hits do look decent. Getting hit does look okay in this game. I also appreciate the fact that James is very low on ammo here. That is a good fix for a remake of Silent Hill 2. The original game is far too easy and far too generous with supplies across all difficulties. This game looks as though it's going to force you into melee combat more often, and that's a good thing. Or at least that's the picture that they've kind of painted with this footage. The combat does sound weak, however, and if you are, like I said earlier, if you are being forced into melee combat more often, it needs to sound better than this. Then we get more prompts telling us exactly where to look and where to go. I find analysing the shotgun is just weird. It could be good. It could have been good, actually, if they had played into the whole pathetic man starts obsessing over guns angle, but I suspect that that's not the case, and they've just added this kind of rotate and inspect feature for guns along with the files and other items purely because it's a video game thing to do in 2024. And the guns don't sound great, just like everything else in the combat. Okay. Again, being objective, I think that Laura is pretty good. I think they've done a good job with that. Though I do find James's performance to be unnatural to Silent Hill 2. With Laura, it's less obvious because she's a child and one that is just walking around the hospital like everything's normal, and she's not in quite the same reality as James. She's not seeing all of this shit because she's innocent. She doesn't belong in James's present reality. So Laura being kind of normal is normal. She's a little brat, but like she doesn't act weird like the characters that are kind of, you know, finding themselves in Silent Hill. And then we get the start of a developer diary. Now, I don't want to be too shitty here because I don't want to aim bile at actual people. So I'm just going to kind of address the quotes of the things that they've said, and I won't be attaching like any emotion to it. I just want to address it on like a critical level. This quote in particular stands out, and I would argue that you probably shouldn't be thinking about any game other than Silent Hill 2, the original, in the context of remaking it. I don't think you're really competing with 2024, you're competing with 2001. Now, I know realistically, yes, obviously, you know, this is what game developers are going to do. It's what publishers are going to kind of push for. They want Silent Hill 2 to be competitive with the Resident Evil remakes, as I've already mentioned in previous videos. The Resident Evil remakes are quite obviously Konami's objective. That level of success, that's what they're trying to go for. They think that they can emulate it. There's an absolute difference in the task ahead of them, though. There's like a mammoth task in remaking Silent Hill 2. like, I really think that they should have gone with Silent Hill 1 first and just done a kind of litmus test. You're not really going to piss people off if you remake Silent Hill 1, because Silent Hill 1, much like Resident Evil, you know, it's a lot easier to remake because it doesn't have, you know, that particular unique atmosphere of Silent Hill 2. Like, you've picked the worst possible fucking game to remake. Now, we get this quote here about how James is not used to fighting, but I think that would have gone over better if it wasn't being said during footage of James dodging melee attacks. And we get comments that his arsenal of attacks is limited, so why is he doing like fucking takedown, fucking execution, like brutal shit? I think that there's a bit of a disconnect between what we are being told and what we are being shown. And now we get commentary from the actors playing James and Maria, and again, I'm not going to tear into these people, you know, they're just doing a job. I'm pretty sure that they're happy to have it, and if this was any other property, they'd be doing a decent job. It's just because it's Silent Hill 2 that unfortunately, like, it just doesn't come across right. It's at this point that my suspicions were correct, that they've done the modern thing of modelling the characters' actual faces on the actors themselves using photogrammetry. Unfortunately, this doesn't work for Silent Hill 2, and this is one game where the developers should have, by all means, captured the voice acting and the general body motion capture, but they probably should have modelled the faces of the characters themselves and therefore been able to have more control and to malleate the expressions of the characters as needed, like Sato did back in the day. This is the kind of game where you should go the extra mile to just make up a completely fictional person, and I know that it would take a lot more effort to animate that face, but for the sake of the expressions needed to tell this story, you probably should have gone that extra mile and not just kind of used photogrammetry to model them on the actors playing the parts. In the original game, the characters do look a bit like the actors playing the parts, but they didn't have the technology, fortunately, back then to basically just completely link the faces together, and so Sato had to do a lot of the animations himself, and therefore he had complete creative control over the expressions that were used in the game. Of course, being Bloober Team, that might have ended up even worse than what we're getting. So I suppose I trust the actors to carry this better than Bloober Team. Still, Bloober haven't directed them well, and we have ended up with such a pedestrian reimagining of the characters' behaviours and the storyline that I feel that the spirit of Silent Hill 2 is nowhere to be seen here. One major issue that I'm now seeing is that I do not get a sinister off-kilter vibe from the new Maria at all. The original Maria is frightening, to be honest. This new Maria looks like a genuinely friendly NPC that is with James on his journey to a good ending. Then the transmission ends with Konami's actual objective, which is to have you spend money on a brand. Ultimately, the essence of Silent Hill 2 is thoroughly gone, faded away, and we are all now widowers. I find myself oddly longing for those awful years when we were getting nothing but crappy outsourced Western Silent Hill games. It would be preferable to this. In summary, the strangeness is dead. The subtlety of the storytelling is dead. Even the satisfaction of the combat is dead. Your erection in these Halo of the Sun swim trunks? Dead. So yeah, I'm kind of at the point now where, like, I don't think I need to talk about this anymore. And honestly, that is my appraisal of what we've seen so far of this game. Like I said, if you're kind of just a casual fan of like spooky games and you just want to shoot some zombie nurses in a hospital or whatever in the dead of night, then I get why you're into it. But as somebody that knows the original game, I look at this and like, this is dead behind the eyes. It has none of the original game's atmosphere at all. This is like a husk. It's just kind of wearing Silent Hill 2's skin. And with that, those are my thoughts on the transmission. So in the meantime, I'll go back to working on my Resident Evil remake script, which had a kind of funny way of coming about because a couple of years ago, I mean, I kind of have the script pretty much done. I've got like a 40-page script where I did like a teardown of Resident Evil Village because I was ripping that game to shreds because I really wasn't happy with it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Resident Evil is on like a completely different level to Silent Hill 2, but still, it can still, you know, piss you off if you feel like it treats you like a fool. And I wrote a big teardown of that game. I haven't gotten around to making the video on it yet, but the nearer and nearer that we get to the inevitable Resident Evil 9, the more relevant it's probably going to be. And then after that, I started to prepare a script for a Resident Evil 2 review. Because whilst I generally do like that game a lot in terms of how that game plays, that is how I want Resident Evil to play now. I think that, for me, has personally set the bar. But obviously it has massive issues with storytelling and the validity of the two different campaigns. And obviously following on from that, there's thoughts about Resident Evil 3 Remake. I mean, where to begin? But then because I was kind of working on those things, I thought, you know what? There's all this conjecture about what the hypothetical next Resident Evil remake's going to be, so why not start at the beginning? And I started working on how I would do Resident Evil 0. Let's start at the beginning. And then, of course, this guy put this April Fool's bloody tweet up, and then, you know, Biohazard declassified rumour kind of info dump, and then everyone's talking about it. And so I've been working on this Resident Evil remake script the past week or so. Yeah, that's probably what's coming next. And fortunately, I can, whilst I'm critical, I can kind of approach that subject with a great deal more joy than this. I honestly just feel like Silent Hill 2 is like dead and gone. It's so funny because like they're remaking this game and they're gearing up for this like pre-Halloween release of this big AAA game, and like I've never felt that the game was more dead than it is now, because whilst Konami were like doing nothing with the franchise for years and years and years, at least that game was still just there untouched, and now we just have loads of people thinking that this is Silent Hill 2, which is just depressing. Anyway, until next time, thank you for listening.
It's been a pleasure talking to you.